To prepare, I have spoken widely to children and young people, and all of them have pointed out today is Halloween. So, two of our rights detectives, Oscar and Sophia, have helped me to prepare an opening statement with a Halloween theme that sets out what children and young people think about the amendments to the bill.
Human rights, children's rights in particular, they're the substitute religion of the Scottish Parliament and of schools in Scotland. So the bill in the Scottish Parliament is to incorporate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law is very exciting for them. And the lady here is explaining how she's been speaking to young people. And the young people, the children of Scotland, are just desperate to see the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, UNCRC, incorporated into Scots law. I don't know, if you've got children, you probably find that they speak of little else. When you ask them what they want for Christmas this year, I'd imagine a lot of them would say, I'm not really bothered about presents, just as long as the UNCRC can be incorporated into Scots law. That's what I really want. I mean, it's a ridiculous spectacle, isn't it? These adults obviously lead the children by the nose to say what they want them to say, and then I think it's dishonest, and then present it as the view of children. And this lady is speaking in a committee of the Scottish Parliament, and everyone else in the committee are adults. There's no children in the room at all. Just have a look at what comes next.
So starting, here is a Halloween web. This is a strong web that represents protections for children's rights. And here are some flies. And as they buzz around, they represent breaches of children's rights, and they're caught by the web. And here is Shirley Ann Spider, the Cabinet Secretary. She's in charge of the web, along with our Spider MSPs and our Spider courts. This web here represents the UNCRC bill as it was passed in March 2021. You can see it provides protections against breaches of children's rights across all areas devolved to Scotland. It was really tough for any of these flies to get through.
So the message to children is clear. This new law will protect you. And it's not just the law, it's the government minister. Shirley Ann Somerville, the government minister, she's going to look after you. She's going to make sure those other nasty adults, like parents and those people, she's going to make sure that you're safe from them. The government keeps you safe.
But the UK Supreme Court means that the web has had to change. It's now a looser web, where children's rights might not always be so well protected. Whilst it catches some flies, other flies might sneak through.
We now meet the villain of the piece, which is obviously the UK government, because kids, the Scottish government wanted to protect you from all these harms, but the nasty UK government has stopped them from doing it. I mean, this is just simple indoctrination. The children have been indoctrinated with the message of the Scottish government. And just to clarify as well, the UK government did prevent this law from passing, but not on any matter of principle. It was basically on technicalities. But let's continue.
But even though this web isn't so neat, children and young people say this is critical. The very fact that a web exists actually scares away the flies, much like the UNCRC bill will help to prevent breaches of children's rights through its very existence. With no web, flies might fly everywhere. They might think they can do as they please. Children and young people really worry that without any UNCRC bill, adults might think they don't need to worry about children's rights.
And again, that's absolute fantasy, isn't it? In other words, the children have told us exactly what we think. They're telling us what we told them to tell us. Now, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child in Scots law, it's not in the law at the moment. I think I'm right in saying it's not part of the law in any other country of the world. It didn't exist at all not too long ago. So what are children vulnerable to now that this law is going to solve? What are the contents of the rights? What difference is it going to make? Now, I'll listen to hours and hours of this discussion in the committee, for which you should be extremely grateful to me. So I listened to them talking for hours, but there was virtually no mention whatsoever of what practical difference this was going to make. The one thing that was mentioned was there seems to be the idea it might get kids out of having to go to assembly at school if there's any religious element to it. So if there's a prayer in assembly, maybe the children will be able to claim their children's rights and not go to assembly. Right, what a great breakthrough for the safety of children and young people in Scotland. That will be, I don't think. But the sort of things it might have an implication for, as I've spoken about recently, boy gets sent out of class for misbehaving. You can't do that. I've got a right to education. Parents say, we'd like to educate our children at home. The government says, oh, no. They've got a right to an education, our type of education. A young person, I've got a right to healthcare. Therefore, I should be able to get the gender-affirming treatment that I want. They're the sort of applications that you can imagine coming from it. I'm going to link to another video. If you're watching the end screen, there's a previous video I made on this topic about the contents of the rights. Do have a look at that. But on we go.
So children and young people have said the most important thing for them is that they need to know about their rights, they need to recognise when their rights are breached, and they need to know who they can complain to.
So they want children to know how to complain when their rights are breached. The right that's breached might be, for example, someone didn't listen to me. My mum didn't listen to me. That's the sort of thing it could end up with. Who should they complain to? The school, the police, social workers. Children can bring their own legal cases under this bill as well. Now, technically, this bill imposes duties on government institutions. But what do those government institutions do? They deal with parents. So they will determine how they deal with parents, and that's very concerning. Now, I'd just like to finish by having a look at a book for big boys and girls. This one has got no pictures in it at all, and it's called Human Rights, Politics and Practice by Michael Goodhart, published by Oxford University Press. And there's a chapter in this about children's rights, and I'd like to read you a few excerpts. The bits I'm reading, they're not like quotations from some like fringe opinion. This is from the main body of the text. So let's see what it has to say about children's rights. It says, indeed, the ultimate rationale for children's rights lies in the problematizing of parental moral agency. In other words, children's rights' purpose is to undermine authority and trust in parents, and to lead to them being viewed with suspicion. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Right, here's another quotation. Children's rights effectively empower officials in relation to parents rather than empowering children. So the talk is about giving children their rights, but who is it that upholds these rights? Who makes the decisions? It's adults. It's the state-employed adults. So it empowers officials as opposed to parents. It disempowers parents, empowers officials, does not empower children. It just enables the state to have more influence over parents. Yeah, pretty straightforward. Okay, here's another one. As such, children's rights advocacy, while often characterised as comparable to earlier civil rights movements, like for race equality, departs from the beliefs of these struggles. While classic civil liberties essentially embody freedoms from state interference, the expanding children's rights framework represents a trend towards external governance of interpersonal relations. In other words, the state interfering in family life, for example. So what goes on in your home becomes the concern of the government increasingly. But what we've got in children's rights is it's basically the named person scheme in new clothes. It's the named person scheme 2.0, whereas the named person scheme aroused huge opposition. The children's rights movement somehow, well, no one's interested. Very little interest in it at all, and it's proceeding virtually entirely unopposed. Critics warn children's rights advocacy is empowering the state to discipline ordinary people for departing from preferred professional parenting norms and risks giving a license to repressive state powers and undermining human rights. And that is exactly what we'll do. So parents who might speak to their children sharply, or maybe sometimes they'll say, I don't want to listen to you anymore, I've heard what you're going to say, but the answer is no. Is their right to be listened to being infringed? What about the right to play? A child says, you're making me do the dishes, I've got a right to play. I've said already, I've got a right to proper education. The state will say you've got a right to proper education, so your mum and dad can't do that. Now, with the named person scheme Supreme Court judgment, that made references to repressive state powers, and this reinforces it. children's rights give the state more power to interfere and control family life. Now, the content of the rights, I say they're mainly bland and basically pointless, really. But the thing is that they get interpreted and reinterpreted by the United Nations on an ongoing basis, and that is undemocratic. So the Scottish Parliament's going to say the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, that's our law too. What does it mean? It means whatever they decide it means at the United Nations. And the United Nations, certainly the departments dealing with this, they're basically captured by progressive activists. So what they will push under the banner of children's rights is going to be progressive ideology. I mean, for example, comprehensive sex education, so-called, which is the sort of sex education to which we oppose vehemently. They would describe that as something that children have a right to under children's rights. Now, in the Scottish Parliament, this whole issue is just seen as a constitutional football. The Scottish Government blamed the UK Government for blocking it. The Unionist parties blamed the Scottish Government for going ahead even though they knew it would be blocked. It really is pathetic to behold. The actual content and implications of the bill are completely ignored. It will undermine parents. It will ultimately harm children by encouraging them to see themselves as customers ready to complain about their, for example, parents. I think that might engender a selfish attitude in some cases. Now, just to say at this point, to finish off, those of you who might suffer from the conservative delusion. Now, the main symptom of the conservative delusion is to say things like, oh yes, I'm not into any of this nonsense. I vote Conservative. The Conservative MSPs swallow this hook, line and sinker. They push back not a jot against the philosophy or the underlying principles involved in the United Nations Convention for the Rights of the Child. Now, in the end screen, you'll see some other videos on this topic that go into some other aspects of it that you might find interesting. And just to finish, do get your tickets for our conference. Time is running out. That's on Saturday, the 11th of November. We'd love to see you there. There is a link below. Right, thanks for watching.